What did you find out about a family member after they passed away from going through their belongings? Great-grandmother passed away. We found a letter from her brother, written in the 1930s. The letter is cryptic, but hints to the fact that Arthur was disposed of and shouldn't be an issue. Arthur would be my great-grandfather who left to Chicago for a job and was never heard from again. My grandmother was a drinker the whole time I knew her. She died when I was 10 of cirrhosis. My grandparents would babysit us during summer vacation and she'd always tell us to get in the car because we're going to Timbuktu. We never ended up getting out of the car, but Timbuktu apparently had bars on the windows and neon signs in them. Her mixer of choice was 7-Up, and she'd put the vodka in the cans and just leave them in the fridge. For years I thought pop went really bad once you put it open in the fridge, and also it would make you feel funny if you had a couple sips. By the time I was in high school I realized what she did that whole time. Timbuktu was the liquor store, the 7-Up was spiked, she drank herself to death. When I was in my 20s I was going through some boxes at my parents' house, and I found one of those Alcoholics Anonymous books. I thought it was strange, since my parents didn't drink, never mind need AA. I opened it and all these people had signed it with various messages. You're so strong, Joy, one day at a time, etc. No clue what year it was from, but she apparently was an AA at one time, but relapsed and never got sober again. Dang. That had to been heartbreaking. Peace. It was more heartbreaking when I found out why she drank. My grandfather was a WW2 Navy vet. After he came back from the war she left Iowa to meet him in San Francisco. They got married and lived in the city, both 19 over 20 years old. They were Northwest Iowa farm kids from a town of about 800. She fell deeply in love with the city. They had one kid there and were creating a life with friends. For some reason my grandpa suddenly got tired of the city and wanted to go back to Iowa and a farm life. My mom told me my grandma suffered from depression ever since she left the city. The farm was lonely and she was made to have 6 more kids. She hated the country. My grandpa eventually lost the farm too. He tried making a concession to her urban desires by moving to the Denver suburbs in the 60s, but by then she was middle-aged, had no friends, and years deep in alcoholism. My grandmother swore up and down about how nasty her daughter-in-law, my aunt, was. Turns out right after the fight those two had, my aunt sent a very heartfelt apology letter and tried for years to make up for it. My grandmother hated her for never apologizing. My grandmother kept this apology in her purse with her passport, green card, social security card, important shit that means something to her. She didn't want us to see the apology. The letter was 20 years old and both people are dead. It's so sad to see people die so bitter. My dad tried really hard to make things work with my mom. Found a stash of letters and other documents related to their divorce. Found a very heartfelt letter pleading with my mom to try to talk things out and do what's best for the kids. As far as the divorce, he basically let her take everything. Mom always made it seem like he just gave up on us. Turns out she gave up on him, and he was trying really hard to make things work. He just did it behind the scenes to not stress out my brother and I. After my granddad died, my grandmother and my dad went through his stuff and found his birth certificate. Turns out he was 10 years older than he claimed. Nobody knew. They reckon he did it so he could join the army during WW2. My dad had a post office box no one knew about. When I discovered it, my mind went immediately to the worst. He had a credit card that my mom didn't know about. When I asked her about it, she looked at the charges and realized that in the months before he died, she was getting worried about finances, so he took out another credit card so they could have dinners out without her seeing them added to their official credit card bill and overly worry. That was just like my dad. Also, quite literally a week before he died, unexpectedly, my dad paid for some program where, if he passed away, the mortgage would be entirely paid for. My grandfather kept a grenade from WWII. He had it hidden in an old beat-up footlocker. The pin had started to erode so only small portions of it were in the hole. I remember accidentally dropping the trunk down the stairs when we moved him out of my aunt's house and into his retirement home. He kept the trunk with him all 10 years he was in the home. He must have moved rooms at least a dozen times. Then we lugged the trunk to my parents' house to clean it out after he died. That 60-plus-year-old unstable explosive was jostled around so many times. It's a ducking miracle it didn't self-detonate. We ended up calling the police to have them safely remove it from the trunk for us. Thanks, Grandpa. Maybe he wanted to go out with a bang. A couple days after my stepdad was killed suddenly, hit by a person who ran a red light, my mom was very upset that she couldn't figure out how to recover this voicemail from him she deleted accidentally. He sent it a week or so prior while she was alone visiting us in another state. My wife was able to recover the voicemail somehow, and it was amazing. It was basically like a goodbye for us. All it was him talking about how much he loves and misses all of us, including my kids. Other than the initial call, I hadn't broke down yet, and I lost it after that one. World lost a great man. That my great grandparents married, divorced, then married again, then divorced again. There was rumored to be a third marriage and divorce between them too, but we only found the paperwork for the first two. They were born late 1800s and both died in the 1980s. What was so funny was that in the files the divorce papers were next to the marriage certificates, telling us a very quick visual story. Other cool things we found: teeth. About 10 total. My grandfather was a dentist, so they could have belonged to anyone really. A lock of hair from my grandfather's sister who died at age 3 from pneumonia. 14 boxes of band-aids, and a social security card for a relative born in 1900. My great-grandmother, who passed at 91, was always rather promiscuous. She had 3 children none of us knew about. She'd had 2 before her first marriage, and 1 that was an affair as far as we can tell. All 3 were put up for adoption. We all kinda were aware of the last one, however she denied that child all the way to the grave. My grandmother, 69, and her sister, 74, have been trying to track down their previously unknown siblings since. So far they tracked down the widower of the youngest one. She died at 50-something in a car accident. My grandmother had severe emphysema from a lifetime of smoking. The doctor gave her an oxygen tank and mandated that we visit her once a day, often at surprise times, in order to get her to stop smoking. So, we were feeling pretty confident we were keeping her from smoking, and we routinely checked the house for anything smoking related. You guessed it, when she died, we found ashtrays and cigarettes stashed everywhere, taped to the toilet lid, in a plastic baggie in a canister of flour, behind light fixtures, and so on. Yes, she had been smoking, while hooked up to her oxygen. My father is now in his late 70s, and a heavy smoker. Some people never learn, I guess. After my grandfather passed, we had to go to his apartment to assess and figure out what we needed to move, donate and whatnot. He had a change ashtray. He put his mints, keys, and hankies. It was typical to see all of the things mentioned. What we did not expect to see was a blister pack of Viagra. After having a good chuckle we continue on. He ended up also having a little wooden box big enough to fit some photographs, yeah no, old school hard copies, and in there we find a plethora of women, which isn't the worst, because he was married happily for a long time till Oma passed, and in there we found a little handwritten note. John, I had to leave early, I couldn't find my underwear, I will call you later. Gio Opa Gio, glad you went out with a bang. My uncle passed about a month ago. Turns out he had a hentai collection in a hollow floorboard. He was married. My aunt had no idea. I took them and burned them without anyone knowing to preserve his dignity with my parents and aunt. If they found out they would have shunned him. They are hardcore religious. Edit. BC of the questions. I didn't find them. He told me about them in his will. He asked me to get rid of them and I burned them because, yes, my parents would go through the trash. My father had a few brushes with CPS, and I have since moved out realizing that they would go through my trash and have before. My grandpa fell during a 5K and went into a coma that lasted 5 months. My mom and grandma were trying to get into his computer so they could handle some finances, but they couldn't figure out the password for the longest time. They found a note that he had written about the password. It was something like Nubaby 2016, because my aunt was pregnant at the time. Showed all of us how deeply he loved not only his kids, but his grandkids too. My girlfriend's best friend's grandfather died. He was a very sweet old man who emigrated to the US from Germany in the 40s. Some of you already realize where this is heading. So while they were going through his house they found a big chest in the corner of the basement, covered in junk. Inside they found a bunch of Nazi stuff. Armbands, medals, a handgun, a rifle etc etc. Okay, not that odd. My dad has all of those things he inherited from my grandfather who stripped these things off the Nazis at the end of the war. Hell, I even own one of those rifles and handguns. In the bottom of the chest they found an SS uniform. To those who aren't familiar with WWI history, the SS were the worst of the Nazis. They ran the concentration camps. Remember Alf Fiennes in Schindler's List? Yeah, he was SS. Okay, that one's kind of odd. The SS were seriously hunted after the war to pay for their war crimes. Most SS officers burned their uniforms before going into hiding. So odd to have one, but not unheard of. Well, they pulled the chest out and found underneath a section of the concrete floor that had been busted out with a piece of plywood covering the hole. Inside the hole they found a piece of cloth covering 12 1 kilogram bars of gold bullion stamped with swastikas. What the duck? So now this woman and her entire family are wondering if their sweet old grandfather was actually a sadistic war criminal. For all they know he stole it before he came to America. But they don't know what to do, who to tell, and what to do with the gold. Thank you for watching this episode. Please like and subscribe for more content. If not, you will find after your parents die that you have a sister